Yeah, 50, 55. Oh, yeah. That's good NAS. Today, we're going to talk about NAS. This is a NAS, if you didn't know what one was. I was lifting it because I needed to get some exercise. So we're going to talk about what NAS is, why you might need it, why you may not need it, or if you want it, what you should do with it. So stick around on Secure Digital Life.
This is a Security Weekly production.
Welcome to Secure Digital Life. If your users are going to keep putting risky stuff on your machine, you're screwed. So Tom can help us understand the complexity of blockchain.
I was reading through the show notes, man, and oof.
In binary, it would be 001. Who cares? But it's probably not significant anyway. It'd be like you're looking out through the HAL dot, you know, like,
oh,
hey, Dave.
It's like Sims, but with, you know,
It would be like
I
Sims.
instead of AI, it's I.
Roger Williams University is a premier destination for cybersecurity, offering in-person and online classes designed and taught in collaboration with industry experts. Using virtual environments that simulate real-world systems, you'll solve complex cyber issues and analyze cyber threats to prepare you for in-demand jobs in this rapidly growing field. Whether you're just starting out or want to advance in the cyber profession, RWU offers degrees and coursework at all levels. Learn more at rwu.edu/cyber. And we have a sponsor now. Do you see that? Cool. We also have a new front intro thing. That's pretty cool too. But hey, why not? Today we're going to talk about NAS, and NAS is Network Attached Storage. If you didn't know what that stood for, it's like one of those acronyms that everybody says, but maybe you don't know what it means. I don't know. I've been building NAS for a long time, and even before it was called NAS, we were building it. And the idea was, could you have a place that's basically a localized cloud? And everybody's sort of starting to understand the cloud. So the cloud is this repository online. Of course, the cloud's rapidly expanding to be servers and routers and firewalls and everything. I just saw this presentation the other day where they were saying you can just move your ASA firewalls into the cloud, and they're virtualized. And so now your whole network can be front end, and you don't need a piece of hardware. And there's a lot of good things about not having hardware locally. As much as I love my hardware, it's my baby. But as much as I like my hardware, you know, moving into the cloud is an awfully convenient thing in some ways, because you're shifting a lot of responsibility for this being alive, for it not getting flooded, for it not getting the power turned off. And HVAC, which nobody ever thinks about, because when you start running all this stuff, it gets hot. But there's a lot of options for you in NAS, and I want to talk about a couple of different ones for you in terms of how that might work and what you could do, because we've been talking about backups. And so today we're starting to talk about different ways you might manage backups and how that sort of affects you. This is kind of localized cloud, so it's like ground fog or something. But basically, why would you want this? I mean, why do you need to have NAS at home or in your domicile? And the issue of it is really about, it's a way to take a lot of storage and share it. And a lot of people want to do that because they got video, they got music, they got pictures, they've got tax files or all these things. And people are starting to share that across their environment, right? I mean, you're doing that. You want it on your phone. You want it on your desktop, you want it on your laptop, you want it wherever you are in your domicile or your office or wherever you happen to be. And as we move into that sort of more, it's always right there in front of me when I need it, these types of storage devices make that more feasible for you, because this, and the very name tells you, this thing, and you can see the back of it here, has attachment points that you can use. And this particular one, oh baby, this particular one actually has redundant power. So it's got two power supplies. It's got redundant NICs. So it's got 2 gigabit NICs that are attached to it. And it's got redundant, and this is just USB. So you can put even more storage on this thing so that it would be sitting there for you no matter what. And this is starting to get to be reasonably priced. I mean, this is a commercial thing. So this is an actual commercial device that you would buy. It's got 4 hard drives in it, and they're nice, like super hot swappable drives. You can pull them out as you use them. And this one in particular has 4 8-terabyte drives located in it, and it can run RAID 5 or RAID 6. I mean, we talked about that on shows previous. Now, RAID 6, if you format this out, you're going to have 16 terabytes of RAID 6 with this 32 terabyte setup. With RAID 5, you end up with 24 terabytes. That's because RAID, if you remember, we talked about that, calculates out. So one of the things you always want to do if you're talking about storage is computing your cost per byte. So how much does it cost you to actually store these bytes? Because that's really your measurement that you'd want to use. And in this particular case, you have to think about it, not just in terms of there's 32 terabytes. So if you did it as a JBOD, which is just a bunch of disks, which means each disk is separate, and you can pool them. So then it becomes one big 32 terabyte pool. That would be a JBOD, but now you don't have any backups of that. So if you have a hardware failure, you're done. And in fact, the JBOD, the whole thing may fail if one drive fails. So if you do it as RAID 5, you'd have 24 terabytes of storage. So you could divide that into the price by 24 terabytes and figure out how much per byte. And with RAID 6, you'd have 16 terabytes. So remember, with RAID 5, one of these drives could fail, and you're still good to go. With RAID 6, 2 of them could fail at the same time, and you're still good to go. So, but you only get 16 terabytes of storage out of 32 terabytes of drives. This particular thing cost about $1,500. So it's a kind of an expensive solution for a lot of home users to even think about. But the way these things work is basically that you're going to plug this device into your network. It's all self-contained. It's got its own cooling. It's engineered, so it's got enough cooling to keep the drives cool. And you just plug it into your network somewhere, and now everybody that you want to allow can access this big repository of storage. So if you put all your video on there, you can access from your TV, you can access from your laptop, from your phone, whatever will access it will access the drive share, and all of a sudden you've got a super cool device. And I'm not marketing this device for this company, and I don't even tell you the name, but you can look them up if you want to. But these are really super cool, nice. You can certainly take this up a notch. So you can get these then instead of the regular old hard drives that have SSD drives in them. Ooh, baby. Then the price gets really high because getting an 8-terabyte SSD drive, I don't even know if they make one. They probably do, but that gets really, really expensive really, really fast. But it's super quick, and it's, of course, less heat that's going to come up. But this little cube doesn't generate very much heat. And it's got its own operating system built into it, and it sits there and runs. It's got a web page. You can access it. You can configure it for whatever. Why would you need it? Basically backup or sharing. And NAS is more about those two features. So if you have a bunch of users in your domicile or your office and you want to share backup space, this is a way to do it. If you want to share videos, I was using it to share videos out to television. So you could take multiple smart TVs in your network and connect them to this file share, and you could actually download videos on the internet. I was using these things for this kind of purpose before it really got feasible to do that. But a lot of companies are selling these kind of boxes now so that you can use them, and they really target them less for backups and more for distribution of music, video, and all this kind of stuff. But they're great for backups too because you don't actually have to attach it. Now, here's the downside. Even with gigabit networking, so that's 1,000 megabit. So if you've got a gig network, which a lot of us do, even with that much throughput, remember, trying to back up 32 terabytes is going to take a while, even on a gigabit network. So it's definitely not as good as maybe attached. The other thing to remember about this is that backups that you put on here, so you put stuff on this little box, they're not going to be protected from ransomware jumping from your machine, which is connected to this file share. So if you have files on this box, the ransomware could jump over to this box if it's attached and the file share is alive. So if you want to use it for backups, for offline or out of band, like we kept talking about in the backup episodes, you would probably want to disconnect this or disable it when you're not actively copying backup images to it. That's what I use it for. So I turn it on and I connect to the file share over my gigabit hardwired network, and I dump my image of my main drives to this thing. So they sit on there. So those are usually like 1 to 4 terabyte images, and I just dump those on there. So there's plenty of space for it. When I'm done, I disconnect the file share. So this is just a way to preserve that stuff from ransomware for a long period of time. Now I have a different box that I was using for video and things like that. So and that's like on an actual server and so forth. But I want to talk a little bit about how you can actually set these things up yourself if you want to do this in a couple of different ways. So the first thing you need to understand is what is a network share. And network shares have sort of some different flavors depending on what you're doing in your home network. And for instance, on Windows, which a lot of people are very familiar with, Windows has the ability to just create a folder, a drive, a space, and share it as a name out on the network. And that's shared through the Windows system. So it's not a layer 3, it's on up in the network stack, and you're sharing some name like // backups. And // backups / Doug is going to end up being a drive that I can just connect to, like you connect to any other resource on your network, and you can share things to it. And you can literally share, you know, just copy and paste things into it. You can set up automatic syncs and all kinds of things if you want to with that. If you're doing that with video, then you can share that folder with any other Windows machine very easily, and all the other Windows machines can see it if you want to. And it's advertised to everybody that's in your network. Now, if you use modern Windows stuff and use home groups and things like that, there are more restrictions placed on these files. But you have to be careful because everybody in that layer 2 segment may well be able to see the share. So that means if you've got friends coming over, if you've got strangers coming over and they're using your network, or your neighbors are using your network, they may well be able to see that share out there in the network, so you have to be careful about that. In Linux, it's not really more complicated if you're just using Linux, but not a lot of people are only using Linux for their end user type stuff. So if you just use a server environment, it's all Linux, then it's not such a big deal. And there are tools like CIFS, which actually advertise file shares in Linux-based systems. And those can be adapted pretty well. Linux can easily access Windows file shares because Linux a long time ago started incorporating the ability to not only just access Windows features, but it even all the way down to the disk level. So Linux can actually see NTFS formatted disks and things like that. But if you're going to actually start getting a mix and match, and this is people's more common setup for this, you would have a Linux backend. So I'm going to pretend this is a server for a second. So you might have a Linux backend box that's going to manage your NAS, and your Windows users who are out there in your environment want to save things to that share. And if you get to that point, what you want to use is called Samba, S-A-M-B-A, and this is in the show notes too, so you can look this up if you want to. Samba is an open source tool that you can load on your Linux box. It's pretty much the gold standard for almost all hybrid networks of this type. There's all kinds of other ways, so don't start foaming at the mouth or anything because I didn't mention your favorite one. But Samba is one that's been around a long time, and a lot of people use it. And what it does is it runs on your Linux machine, and then Samba advertises those file shares in a way that Microsoft can comprehend. So all of a sudden, you actually are back to that original just sort of Microsoft file share environment that you're used to when you have a Windows-based system. The reason I like Linux-based servers for this is because they're free, so the operating system doesn't cost you any money. Samba, CIFS, all these tools can be loaded onto Linux for free, and they do work with Windows. If you want to use Windows Server, nothing wrong with that if you like it, but if you want to use Server 2016, which I think is out, you know, you're going to have to buy a license for that from Microsoft, and that can get pricey, and they price it based on the number of CPUs and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, you know, it's kind of a bit of a twitch about using the Microsoft server side stuff. Personally, I find the Microsoft server side stuff hard to use. But that's just because I've been using Linux, Unix for so long. I like the fact that it's free. That always is a big selling point to me. But here's the sort of bottom line on setting up NAS server type stuff. Remember, those file shares that you set up, anyone can see those who accesses the network unless you take some kind of action to prevent that. So if you have a guest Wi-Fi network that's in the same subnet And if you don't know what subnet layer 2 means, go look at the archive, and there's an episode that explains that. But if you go back and look at those things, what you'll find out is that even if it's on Wi-Fi and you have a guest network that people can access without a password, they can actually see your file shares because they're just advertised, or they're broadcast across your network. And that's a terrifying kind of problem, because that means a person sitting in a white van out in your driveway can actually access your Wi-Fi. And if they can access your Wi-Fi, they can access your file shares. And if they can access your file shares, well, that's what they go after. So if you've got video and pictures and things stored in file shares, that's a really easy thing for people to get to. Likewise, if you have friends, family, children, relatives that drop by all the time, you may actually have a kind of a security hole there, in the sense that, and I've seen this a lot. This is what I do when I come visit people. That's why I never get invited to anybody's house anymore. But, you know, I'm like bored, so I sit there and I start looking at what's available. And what happens is you think, well, the only people using our network are our family. And, you know, so we trust our family. Oh, if you do, great. Then, you know, your cousin comes to visit and stays for a week, and they want access to your Wi-Fi, and you give them the password and they log in. Okay, so now your cousin is on there. Well, then your cousin, you know, meets a guy out on the street who, you know, is maybe disreputable and brings him home. And then you come back from work, and all of a sudden this cousin that you don't know and their friend is sitting on the couch in your living room, and they're all sitting there with their devices open, and you're thinking, wow, they can access all of our file shares, and I don't know who this guy named Herbert is. You know, maybe he's, not that that really happened or anything. But, so all that said, so the security piece of this is you need to start thinking about how to set permissions on file shares that you create. And you should do this wherever you're doing it, whether you're doing it at home or you're doing it at work or anywhere else, because I see people all the time. When I used to audit companies, I would see people who had their laptop at work and they had shared a folder, you know, maybe with their boss or somebody, but they didn't set any permissions on it, so it was just shared to everyone. And there was a kind of a famous incident at one company I was auditing where they had shared all this salary information, and employees saw it because the file share was called employee salaries, and people were seeing that pop up on their, you know, if you hit that network button on your Microsoft machine on your desktop, and all of a sudden they were seeing all these file shares. And people do this all the time at work. So maybe you don't, but other people do, and they open that network button and see what's out there. And certainly people like me do that all the time. Hackers love to do that kind of stuff. And remember, as Wi-Fi has extended our networks, it means there may be people sitting in the Marriott Marquis across the street who can see into your network. One time I was at the Marriott Marquis in New York, and I was actually able to see a person in an apartment across the street, and I could actually see their file shares, of some of which had pictures and all kinds of stuff, and I actually had write privileges to it. So you need to figure out how to set permissions on those file shares so that only users you allow can access that, or you may well get in trouble even at home, because eventually somebody's going to jump in and maybe just they're not even doing anything intentional, but you've got your dissertation in a folder called this, and you know you share it across the house so you can get to it wherever, whichever room, you know, where the spirit moves you, and you decide to write a page, and someone sits down and overwrites it with a file with the same name because they didn't know what it was, or they delete it because they needed space. And I had a person contact me about this. Didn't happen to me, but I had somebody contact me with it, and that was exactly what happened. And their spouse deleted their dissertation because they were trying to make room to save a bunch of family photos, and the drive said, "Oh, drive almost full." So they went in and saw some folder that said this, and they thought, "Oh, that means get rid of it," and they hit delete, and it was gone. And then they saved a whole bunch of stuff to the drive, and guess what? It overwrote all that space. So all of a sudden, there's this. So in Linux and everything, you can build these things and essentially roll your own, which is a really cool thing to do. So if you want to do this, I want to give you some steps and pointers, and it's something you can research and you can set up and do very easily. It's a great way to learn about file shares, operating systems, file storage systems, and hardware, all in sort of one exercise that may get you something at the end of it. So if you want to build NAS at home, the first thing you need to decide is who's going to use the share and what operating system is going to be in use, or operating systems. So you got to get those things put down first, and understand that we're all Mac users, or we're all Linux users, or all Windows users, or, you know, guess what? We've got some of everything. So at our house, we have some of everything. There are a lot of factors you may have to take into account, like Active Directory and LDAP and all the. If you have all those things at your house or at your office, those things may affect your ability to write to a file share and so forth. So you may want to think about that. Most people at home, the only thing they have using is something like Home Group or something from Microsoft. So it really won't be that big of a deal if you are doing it at home, because you should be administering it. The first decision you have to make then is about hardware. Are you going to roll your own, which is cheap because you can use old hardware, or are you going to buy something? And, if you want to sit down and buy something like this cool little gadget here, this is $1,500, but if you have some old machines sitting around, you may be able to take hard drives out of them and build your own sort of JBOD arrays. You can certainly buy pieces and modularize it. Like if you go to PC Pit Stop or somewhere like that, you can buy like rack-mounted. I usually build rack mounts with 24 drive bays in them, and you can plug drives in there and then build your own NAS from that. What OS is going to run on the NAS? This is a big question, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. How much storage are you going to need? Do you need 1 terabyte, 50 terabytes, 2 petabytes? I don't know. You need to figure that out because it really affects what this is going to cost and how you're going to build it. How are you going to use it? So how's the storage going to actually get used? Is it backups? Is it video? And because that determines a lot of throughput issues and so forth. And then how do you control access to all this stuff? Because that share is going to be sitting out in your network. So if you want to roll your own, I recommend at least a place to start if you're trying to learn about this is something called FreeNAS. And FreeNAS is a Linux distribution that has all the management tools already built into it. And it was the first one I ever did was FreeNAS. And FreeNAS has got a PHP website that starts. So once you install it all, put it on a server. You need to have to be a fast server because this is not a number crunching box. This is just a storage box. And if you're just learning, it's fine to build it on a little dinky box and just get it working so you understand all the ins and outs of it before you try to build something big. But FreeNAS has got tools you can use to manage permissions. You can use it to manage the shares, what they're called, how they're distributed, all kinds of stuff. That box also has CIFS built into it, so that CIFS does allow Windows shares. Instead of using Samba, they use CIFS, and it allows you to share all that out. It supports software RAID. Oh, I don't like software RAID, but we'll talk about that in a sec. Well, actually, I should talk about it now. Hardware RAID is what I've been talking about a lot, although RAID is the same. RAID 5, RAID 6, RAID 0, RAID 1. We've talked RAID 1.0. We talked about those things. Whether it's hardware or software, the RAID protocol itself is the same. So the way it formats out, the way it saves drives, the way it manages things is all the same, regardless whether it's hardware or software RAID. The difference is that hardware RAID has designated processor. It's on a card that is going to manage all your RAID devices. So you plug all your RAID devices into that card, and the card manages your RAID. Now, sometimes you get motherboards that has RAID built into it, but it's rare to see motherboards with for home users with RAID 5 or RAID 6 built into them. It's usually RAID 1, RAID 0, and and people don't even know why they're using it, and they use it. But if you want hardware RAID, you typically buy a RAID card, and that RAID card's got a processor dedicated to it, and it has built into it a battery typically that allows the RAID to spin down. And that's what happens when you have a power outage. So the card keeps running and it clears the caches and it spins all the drives down even if the power has failed otherwise. And that's what that battery does. Software RAID is exactly what the name implies. It's an emulation of RAID that's managed in the operating system. So now that means, and it works fine for home stuff, it means that your operating system and your CPU in your system is going to manage all your RAID applications. And that's, I don't like it because you're really, if that machine's being used for anything else, it's going to really get blasted because the RAID does take a lot of, crunch time. So I'm not a big fan. There's a lot of other reasons that software RAID fails. So if your system crashes, for instance, because the software RAID is running in memory on your system, if you lock your system up playing a video game, you lock your system up or your cat pulls a plug, that software just poof, and then all of a sudden everything is gone. And you get corruption and all kinds of problems. But not a fan of software RAID, but it does support it. It also supports hardware RAID. So FreeNAS will let you run that RAID box. If you're going to do Linux, be sure the RAID card you're looking at supports Linux, and that the Linux distro you have supports that RAID card, or you're going to get into a big, giant mess, and you'll have to be rebuilding kernels and all. You don't want to do that. But as it is, you could take just about any old computer, because Linux is really small and it runs really easy, and you could throw FreeNAS on it and you could experiment with this. And that's what I suggest. So get 3 of the same old hard drives, and you can buy old hard drives on eBay. You can buy them, you can buy small hard drives or whatever. Pull them out of old machines you got sitting around or whatever, as long as they're the same. Slap at least 3 of them in there and run a RAID 5 FreeNAS. And you can do software RAID for that because you're just trying to learn how it works. And the software hardware is pretty much going to be the same thing for that purpose. But remember, if you're going to do this for something serious, hardware RAID's probably your way to go. I know there's some software RAID people out there that are going to get upset. Remember, though, this experimental system you're building, this old system, old hard disks die screaming, always. And when old hard disks die screaming, that may happen sooner rather than later if you're playing around with old junk that you had sitting in your basement for 2 years. It's great to play with. It's great to learn from. But when you start talking about your backups and other things like that, you may want to seriously consider pulling that down and sitting with it and saying, okay, maybe I'm going to hold off on that for a little while. So just to keep you informed of that, in terms of those old drives. So if you want to start doing stuff serious, you may want to put it together. But I like that because I can practice, and if I screw up, so what? I can wipe everything and start over, and that's the beauty of all this free stuff that's there. Operating systems, then, I love Linux. I've liked it for years. It's free. It's fun to play with. It is very versatile, but it does have a lot of twitches with it that can be a problem. How much storage do you need? A lot is always better, but it gets expensive. So remember, RAID eats up your disk space. I did put some links to some RAID calculators on there. So if you want to see how much you're going to get for RAID 5, RAID 6, I would strongly encourage you to use some RAID 5 or RAID 6 setup for your NAS. So if you get a drive failure, you can replace it and you won't lose everything. Because if you just slap them all in there, it's going to be a problem. How will you use it? Movies, pictures, music, or is it just backups? If you're backing up 3 laptops that each have a terabyte and everybody wants to download offline videos, we won't say what kind. You can choose whatever kind of Disney videos. You could put all that stuff on there, but it may determine that you need a lot more space. So if you're going to use it for that, if you're going to use it for backups, just be sure and remember it's not necessarily an out-of-band backup if you leave it connected all the time. So if it's always plugged into your network, you got a bit of a problem there. Access control. Use permissions, logins, and file permissions. Don't share a password to everybody in your household, or they'll have a friend come over and that person downloads, all their child porn onto your machine. Oops, that's really, really grim. Somebody may share that file share out on, and just remember, you'll be sorry if you don't use permissions. And finally, the last thing I'll mention here is just who will back up the backups. This is one of those endless things about, now I got a backup. Well, I really need to back up my backup. So the reason I keep saying that is because if you don't back up offline, out of band, this device for this particular one or FreeNAS or anything else, if it's permanently connected, I said that repeatedly, but I'm going to keep saying it. If it's connected, that means that somebody in your network can accidentally download malware, and that malware is going to jump right across the file share and get written to this thing. And then this thing is infected with the ransomware too. And then when it encrypts everything, it's going to encrypt this just the same. So if your backup's on there in the encryption, you're not going to be able to get it. And when you can't get your backups back, you're going to be really, really sorry, and you're going to yell, "Doug, why? Con!" But the truth is that you do need a backup somehow of the backup. And if this is it, and this is what I was using these things for, was to put my images on, I disconnect the file shares then when I'm not using it. And that way, I can at least rest assured that I've got an offline backup somewhere from some point in the past. PC Pit Stop with a dash is a great place to, if you want to buy actual chassis and things like that. They're expensive. I just before the show, I went on and jumped in and did a 24 bay 2 terabyte drive array without SSD, and it was going to be right around $7,000, which is cheap. If you go online and you want to buy an actual drive array that was fully spec'd and engineered, probably $60,000. So definitely cheaper than that, but a lot more expensive than rolling your own. Next week, we're going to start talking about SQL injections at the request of some viewers. So if you do have requests in the future, please hit us up, and we'll definitely put them on the rotation to talk about, as long as it's not obscene or illegal. And we will start talking about SQL injection. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.